So, good afternoon, everybody. I will continue today on the lecture about race and ethnicity. But before that, I want to just clarify some things here related to the extra activities. As I mentioned by email, instead of having a total of 4 possible points on extra credit activities, now we're going to have 10 extra possible points. So that's pretty much, you can gain a full grading scale with these 10 points here. And the way that I organize these extra activities, this extra credit, is detailed in the calendar of activities, in the syllabus. So at the end there, you're going to see that we already had extra credit activity 1, which was pretty much 1 quiz with 2 multiple choice questions. And then we had extra credit 2 on November 10th. And then last Thursday, we had extra credit 3 inside quiz 17. And some people said, oh, I answered the 4 questions, but I just got the result for the first 2 questions related to the first point, not the other one. And that's exactly what I explained in class last week. For extra credit activities, even in cases of quizzes, I have to manually grade them on Canvas. Canvas doesn't have an easy system as eCampus. I already did that only for extra credit 1. I did not do that for extra credit 2 or for extra credit 3, which is within quiz 17, right? But here we have 1 point, 2, 3, 4, 7, sorry. I count something wrong here. So it's like 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, 6 points, 9 points, 10 points in total of extra credit activities. And I sent an email yesterday reminding you that the third attempt for exam 3 was open until today at noon. And some people replied to me saying, oh, I know that you reopened the exam 3 today, but I have health issues and everything. Of course, for health issues, I will reopen. But the exam 3 has been reopened for the third attempt since last Wednesday. That email that I sent yesterday was just a reminder. Since last Wednesday, November 11th, exam 3 was open for a third attempt and closed today. If someone could not get it, take it because of health reasons, just send me the appropriate documents. Today at 4:30 p.m., quiz 18 is going to be open, and quiz 18 is going to be about the chapter on race ethnicity. It's the first quiz related to the race and ethnicity chapter. Extra credit 4 is going to be based on an assignment that's already available in the course website. And I sent you guys the link. And it's and you can just answer it in a Word document and upload it in Canvas. So this file here with extra credit 4, which is worth 3 points, is available in the course website. If you just go to the course website, it's going to be at the top here. Extra credit 4 critical thinking. The instructions, if you click there, it's going to open this file. And this assignment, this extra credit assignment, is due on Thursday at noon. And then I will also post extra credit 5 related to social responsibility on the website. I will post instructions here. If you click here, the file is not going to be there. This one is there, but the other one has not been uploaded yet. but this one here is already available. You can already start answering and upload on Canvas. This assignment here is due on Thursday. Extra credit 5 assignment. You'll be able to upload it, started on Thursday until Tuesday at noon. So you're gonna have like few days to do it, including the full weekend. The way that I ask you guys to submit it is pretty much within Canvas. You're gonna see a place there to submit the assignment. And I use this tool in Canvas called Turnitin. It's also available on eCampus. You might have seen it already. That it pretty much compares your answers to whatever material they have in their database to see if you copied it from somewhere else, from the internet, from other students, and so on. So it detects plagiarism. So you should not copy other people's work, copy stuff from the internet. It should be your own words. And this assignment should be done individually, right? It should not be done in groups. So Luis asks, how formal is the assignment supposed to be, like citation-wise? The more formal, the better. If you're citing a material from our textbook, an extra article, academic article, just do it the most formal as you can. And the purpose here, the purpose of this assignment is to highlight the fact that we should discuss population issues using scientific data to support our analysis and not to rely on preconceptions or in perceptions we might have about the specific demographic subject. So that's the main idea. I do not want to know your own opinion about the task that's detailed down here. I want to know that you provide a discussion about these topics here based on material that we discussed throughout the semester and scientific material. We're talking about science here, right? Don't care about anything else. And the material that you can focus that, it can be from different chapters, can be on fertility, migration, mortality, all these different chapters that we discussed here. The more, the better. And that's why I'm letting you write up to 500 words. And so just reading this, a consistent discussion in demographic literature is related to how rapid population growth could potentially impact natural resources, climate change, and poverty in developing countries. Some researchers emphasize the need for more improvements in agricultural production and increased concern with environmental limitations facing a growing population. They argue that there are too many people on Earth, and we would all be better off if there were fewer people on the planet. So it's a little bit related to the Malthusian worldview of population studies. So it's a more negative way of thinking how population growth could impact our lives, could impact the society, could impact Earth. All the researchers indicate that we've overcome these challenges through a reduction in poverty, education improvements, and the provision of food to large populations. So it's that debate that we talked a little bit. Population and economic growth, which one is the dependent variable, which one is the independent variable. I want you to explain that. Do you think there are too many people in the world nowadays? Why? How close do you think we are to the environmental limits of human population growth? When I ask those questions, it looks like I want to know your opinion based on whatever preconception you had before this class, but no, it's based on material studied in this classroom. And that's highlighted here in the purpose. Discuss these different concerns related to population growth, transition, and evolution for current societies. So related to population growth, population transition, and population evolution. Population transition, you remember the demographic transition model. We are talking about mortality declining, and then afterwards fertility declines. Those are the kind of transitions that we have been seeing through time. how that explains whether population growth is a pressure to our society. Evolution, again, it's not a discussion about science against religion. We are just talking about science in this class. Population evolution, I want to say that's exactly all these changes that societies have been passing. For example, when we talk about migration, internal migration started from more rural areas to urban areas. But right now, we discussed that subject related to migration evolution, that people start to move from bigger cities into more mid-town cities, or mid-sized cities, sorry. Because now people is not just a movement from rural to urban, it's much more complex than that, okay? So it's just a way for you to kind of like compile all this material that we have been discussing here in class, and kind of like showing the different points of view, scientific point of views that we discussed in the class. So the document in Microsoft Word format should be in a letter paper size format, 1-inch margins, Arial font, size 11, 1.5 line spacing, and a maximum of 500 words. So that will give around 1 page. And I don't have Word. Just use Google Doc. Everybody here is an A&M student, so you have access to Google Drive. You can write your answer in a Google Doc and just download it in a Word format. So there is no excuse, okay? So the deadline is pretty much 2 days from now, on Thursday at noon. And then I will post extra credit number 5, also worth 3 points. And that one is gonna be due on Tuesday at noon. So you have several days to answer, to upload your assignment. Taylor, you're welcome. Yeah, I'm glad to give you these extra credit opportunities. And remember, all these extra credit opportunities I have to grade by hand, so it's going to take a little longer. One student sent me a few messages saying about her issue with health issues. I don't know if she's attending the class right now. I replied to every single email that students sent to me. And I just received one today, and she said that there were a couple of emails that she sent that I did not answer. I did answer every single email that she sent me. Probably my reply to her went to her spam folder. I looked in my spam folder and there is nothing there from students in this class. I also told several months ago that I do not answer messages that are sent to Canvas. That would be just too much stuff to be looking at. If you want to communicate with me, send an email to amaral@tamu.edu. And so if you have a question that is sent on Canvas that I did not reply to you, just send that same question, if you still want an answer, by email. Right? It's really simple, really simple. The other thing is, like in the syllabus, the student course evaluation is open now, so you can complete the form. Where is it? Here. On this website, has been open since November 11th, and it's going to close on November 30th. It used to be on Pica before, but now it's on this portal, IEFIS. And if you don't know exactly how to use it, there is this step-by-step guide here. So yeah, just please provide your background there, your feedback there. Good. So I will, any questions related to these extra credit activities? So you pretty much we have a total of 10 points. And we already had 1, 2, 3 possibilities, and we still have 7 more points to go, right? Quiz 18 is going to be open today at 4:30. Quiz 18 is going to be open today at 4:30. And it's going to close tomorrow at noon. Extra credit 4, it's already open. Someone just asked, when will extra credit 5 be open? I plan on updating or uploading the file related to extra credit 5 on Thursday. So on Thursday, I will put instructions to extra credit 5. Extra credit 4, the deadline is Thursday at noon. So in the same day, I will post extra credit 5, which is going to be due on Tuesday. Cool? Thank you. Questions? Anything else? All cool? Awesome. I can see the chat here, so if you have questions, you can ask on the chat if you want. Every day is a different story with this computer, so. I mentioned to you that this material here related to inequality of opportunity is an extra material that I added to this chapter related to race ethnicity. And it's part of this project called Opportunity Insights, based at Harvard and coordinated by Professor Raj Chetty. And the main idea of this study is to understand like race and ethnicity and economic opportunity in the United States with an intergenerational perspective. So the idea is that they have all this longitudinal data. What does it mean, longitudinal data again? They get all this data from 1989 until 2015, and the data are about the same people over time. So we can link people over time. This is data that we can connect people through their ID, and then we can connect these people that are now adults working in the labor market in more recent years, and we can link their information to their household where they used to live when they were children. So we know how was the condition, the earnings of their parents back when they were children, all right? So this idea is to pretty much see if the condition in which these children were raised by the level of income of their parents influenced the way that they are nowadays. And that's only possible if you have this longitudinal data when you can link people over time. And in this case, I want to know if the condition of one generation, the parents, influence the condition, the socioeconomic condition of another generation, the children, when the children are adults. So that's why it's a study that takes into an intergenerational perspective. The main results that I'm going to discuss here is pretty much summarized in these bullet points here. There are disparities in terms of intergenerational mobility, vary by race, ethnicity. So whether someone is gonna have higher or lower chances to succeed in life compared to their parents, those chances vary by race, ethnicity. Family characteristics and ability don't matter, right? So actually the background of their family and actually training and all the ability of individuals are not really statistically significant in this analysis. And the racial gap persists even among boys who grow up in the same neighborhood. So let's say that we have a white and an African-American boy that grew up in the same neighborhood. Their chances of them to succeed in life will be different, even if they grow up in the same neighborhood. So these racial differences and chances to succeed in life compared to their parents is much lower among African-American boys compared to white boys. And their main recommendation of this study is that reducing the black-white income gap will require efforts whose impacts across neighborhood and class lines and increase upward mobility specifically for Black men. The specific group in our society who has been experiencing the lowest improvements in intergenerational mobility are exactly Black men. So in order to solve that issue, we have to focus policies on that specific group of society, right? And this is an article, and just to show you here, this website I showed you at the end of the last lecture, it's this one here, and they have all different sorts of resources, slides in PDF, in PowerPoint, data, papers, and so data is available here. We can download them from this website, data in Excel, in Stata, if you are familiar with the statistical software. You have full papers that explain their analysis on this subject, so it's a lot of different resources. The New York Times got data from these results back in 2008, and they summarized it in this article here, which I cite here at the bottom of the slide. So you can just go to this link here, it takes you to this page. And here we are looking at children who grow up rich, like in this case here, boys who grow up rich, and what are the chances of continuing rich, being upper middle class when they are adults, middle class, lower middle class, or poor. White boys here are the yellow squares, and the Black boys are the blue squares. And what you see, this is an animation. I really like the New York Times, some of the more friendly way that they show this data. And it's pretty much showing that white men have much higher chance of continuing rich later in life if they grow up with a rich family than Black men, 39-18. So there are structural challenges to Black men in this country. And a higher percentage of Black men who, although grew up rich when they were children, they will become poor later in life, and compared to a lower percentage among white men. If you just let this result go on, it will just complete, and that's this result here that I did a screenshot and I put in our lecture, right? So it's just until this thing goes into the end, it gets into this result here. He does also, I will show some of these graphs afterwards, and they also show the opposite. Boys who grow up poor and how they do later in life. And that's exactly the opposite. White men who grow up poor, in a poor family, will have higher chances of later on becoming rich compared to Black men. And more Black men who grow up poor will have higher chances of continuing to be poor later in life. So the main recommendation here is to really focus on the conditions of these Black men who are facing all these different disadvantages. So this is just this article, a lot of these different graphs here I got from this New York Times article, and that's what I'm going to go through right now in the lecture, right? So as I discussed before, among those boys who grew up rich, a higher percentage of white men will continue rich when they are adults compared to Black men, and a higher percentage of Black men will actually become poor later in life compared to white men. And this is the final result for the other way around. People who grow up poor, higher percentage of them, like 10% of white men will become rich later in life, only 2% of Black men, and 31% of white men will continue poor, and 48% of Black men will continue poor. So higher percentages here, okay? So intergenerational persistence of disparities varies substantially across race ethnicity groups. For the analysis of Hispanic Americans specifically, they are moving up significantly in the income distribution across generations because they have relatively high rates of intergenerational income mobility. So Hispanic Americans have higher chances to increase in their income mobility in relation to their parents, comparing them to African American boys and African American boys compared to their parents. So the Hispanic Americans are moving faster and more significantly in terms of income mobility related to their parents instead of African Americans. Black Americans have substantially lower rates of upward mobility and higher rates of downward mobility than whites, as we just saw in these two previous graphs summarized by the New York Times. And the analysis of the New York Times is all based on this Opportunity Insights project. So this leads to large income disparities that persists across generations and creates all this racial gap in income in the US. And the Black-white income gap is driven entirely, I think Amanda, your video is on if you didn't mean to do it. If you want to leave it on, it's okay. Black-white income gap is driven entirely by large differences in wages and employment rates between Black and white men. So there are not really clear differences between Black and white women. The Black-white income gap is more related to differences between Black men and white men. And this is shown in these two graphs here. So this is the income rank of parents. The ones down here are more poor parents, and the ones that are here are richer parents. The 10th percentile are those parents that only they are richer more than 10% of all other parents in this specific sample. These ones here, they are richer, more better off than 90% of the other parents. So these guys here are the richer ones in this scale. And this is the income rank of parents. And this is the income rank of the children of these parents. But these children now, of course, are adults. So we compare the income rank of their parents when the children were being raised by the parents. And then we compare with their situation right now. And what you see here, for example, Black men who grew up with parents in the 10th percentile of income actually increase a little bit to the 35th percentile. They increase a little bit. So their parents were in the bottom 10% in the distribution, but now they improved to the 35th percentile. From 70, but see, here they don't increase as much. They're only on the 5th percentile. From 80, they are on 52nd and a half percentile. So not 52nd percentile. So you see that those Black men that grew up in richer neighborhoods, in richer households in which parents had high income, they were in 90th percentile, they are now just in the 55th percentile. White men also have some downward mobility, for example, from 90th to 67th, but it's still the gap between white and Black men persists across all the income rank of parents. Black men consistently earn less than white men, regardless of whether they were raised poor or rich. Even if they were raised rich, they all drop a little bit on average, but the income gap in terms of race still persists. No such income gap Someone asked a question here. When do you think the Hispanic population is moving? Why do you think the Hispanic population is moving up in income distribution faster than the African American population? That's a good question. As we saw in the previous slides of this lecture here, we saw that African Americans, they have higher levels of residential segregation. They have overall lower levels of education attainment. They have lower levels of intermarriage, interracial marriage. They have lower levels of multiracial self-identification. So it seems that the Hispanic population is integrating faster to the American society than the overall African American population. So the Hispanic population has higher chances of marrying people from other races, from other race ethnicities. They have higher chances of self-classifying as being multiracial. So there is more integration with other groups. And they have lower levels of residential segregation. So all these aspects are making them are associated with their chances of having better mobility than the African American population. And the overall, I mean, it's hard to single out each one specific reason, but all the way in which we have the American society, and we have been discussing that a lot in these last years in terms of systemic racism and how the justice system, it's really unfair with the African American population compared to other race ethnicity groups. All in terms of racism and discrimination, the labor market, and all over in their daily life, all that seems to be associated with the chances of people to succeed, right? And it seems that the Hispanic population is facing these issues in a lower degree, at least compared to the African American population. And here, among white women and black women, you see that actually there is not really significant differences in their ranking later in life based on the rank when they were being raised by their parents. So those that were raised by parents in the 40th percentile, only 40% of the people poorer than those parents and 60% richer. Those ones there are around in the 43rd and 45th percentile, right? So the differences in terms of intergenerational income mobility by race, it's driven mostly for differences between white men and black men than by black women and white women. And that has really important implications for public policies, which was the first slide from this topic in the lecture, that if you want to implement policies that deal with this issue, you have to implement policies dealing specifically with the case of the challenges that the black man population, the black male population faces in the US. Differences in family characteristics explain very little of this black-white income gap, conditional parent income. If we control for parent income, parental marital status, education, and wealth explain very little of these chances, these differentials between black men and white men. Differences in ability also do not explain the patterns of intergenerational mobility. And as I mentioned in the first slide too, the black-white gap persists even among boys who grew up in the same neighborhood. Black boys have lower incomes in adulthood than white boys in 99% of census tracts. So just looking at census tracts dividing the country in smaller geographical areas, boys that grow up in the same census tracts, black boys will have a lower income when they become adults compared to white boys who grew up in the same place. So these black-white differentials in income will persist. Both black and white boys have better outcomes in low poverty areas. But black-white gaps are larger on average for boys who grew up in such neighborhoods. So overall, black and white boys who grow up in low poverty areas, so richer areas, they have better outcomes later in life. So pretty much, if we have a black boy and a white boy who grew up in an area, in a census tract that has low poverty areas, low poverty levels, so has more middle class people or richer people, they will have better outcomes later in life. But still, the gaps between black boy and white boy are really large, even in those neighborhoods with low levels of poverty, right? So although black boys have an advantage of being those richer census tracts neighborhoods, the gap still persists if you compare them to the other white boys within those same neighborhoods. So yeah, for sure, for black boys, it's better to grow up in richer neighborhoods compared to other black boys. But if you control for place of residence and compare them with other white boys in the same neighborhood, these gaps are even larger, right? The few areas in which black-white gaps are relatively small tend to be low poverty neighborhoods with low levels of racial bias among whites and high rates of father presence among blacks. So look, there is a specific example of success in which the gap between black men and white men, it's narrower. You don't really have this huge gap in income later in life between black and white boys. So this gap is much lower exactly in neighborhoods that are richer, that have low levels of poverty, have lower levels of residential bias, residential segregation, and it's formed by households in which you have the presence of both the father and the mother. Black males who move to such neighborhoods early in childhood earn more and are less likely to be incarcerated. So that's a successful story in which you have a smaller racial gap in intergenerational income mobility. What's the problem? That fewer than 5% of black children grow up in neighborhoods with low levels of poverty, low levels of racial bias, low levels of residential segregation by race, and really few of them live also in these neighborhoods that combine all this information with higher rates of father presence in the household, right? Another issue that it's highlighted here is based on the chances of people being incarcerated in their life, based on the income rank of their parents, the household income rank of parents. So here, for example, among white men in the 35th percentile, they grew up kind of like in a poor, low middle class household. Only 30, they were better off more than only 35% of the other households. And all these other ones here, 65% of them were more better off when they were children. Those children that are white men who grew up in such neighborhood, in such households with lower levels of income, they have only 2% of chance of being incarcerated. But this is the same chance of being incarcerated of a black man who grew up in one of the richest households in the US, like around the 99th percentile. Black boys that are raised in these really rich households, they have the same chances of being incarcerated as a white man that grew up in actually a low, middle class, or even poor households. The sons of black families from the top 1%, these guys here, had about the same chance of being incarcerated on a given day as the sons of white families earning $36,000 a year. And black men that grow up in really poor neighborhoods, their chances of being incarcerated is really high, like higher than 20% among these ones here. And look at this gap compared to white men, only above 6% of chance of being incarcerated. The thing also is that very few non-white Americans start their life as children at the very top of the distribution. So this one here is pretty much showing the income rank of parents and the income distribution of the children later in life. So most of the white children, they are disproportionately concentrated in households with parents that are really well off, above the 90th percentile, and lower percentages in households with parents with low income, in the lowest percentiles. The black population, more representation of those in households in which they grow up in the lowest percentiles compared to the higher one. So what happens in the US a lot, it's not just a problem of income inequality. It's a problem about inequality of opportunity, in which these boys here, most of them did not have an opportunity to succeed in life because most of African American boys, they grew up, or African American children, this is for both sex, most of them grew up in poor neighborhoods. The same thing about Hispanics. Most of the Hispanic children also grew up in poor neighborhoods or in poor households in which their parents had low income. And most of them here were raised in these poor households. Asians, you see kind of like a concentration both in the bottom and in the top a little bit. And this is the overall percentage of these race ethnicity groups. So income inequality, usually you hear different debates in this country. Usually some economists say that income inequality is good because it creates challenge in the economy, so people try to work harder to improve their lives. I don't see income inequality as being something good, because income inequality is completely related to inequality of opportunity. People do not have the same opportunity when they are born to other subgroups. And this is really clear on this graph. The white population in the US, most of the children are raised in more rich households compared to blacks and to Hispanics, okay? And in this case here, showing that the high mobility rate for Asian Americans is partially about immigration, and that we have to link this graph here with the following one. So here we are just taking the income rank of parents and income rank of children when the children are adults. And we have Asians in red, white in yellow, and Hispanic, green, and black in blue, and Native Americans in gray. And what you see here is that when you look at this graph, you say, wow, for those people that grow up with parents that were in the 30th percentile, Asian kids back later in life when they become adults, they improve a lot their economic condition. They jump from the 30th to the 57th percentile. And that's a better jump than any other race ethnicity group. But if you do the same figure only for those with mothers born in the US, then you see that this gap by race ethnicity drops. So the Asian group here gets close to the white, right? So it's pretty much saying, if I just get information about Asians that mothers were born in the US, so third plus generation Asians, then their chances of growing up in the economic scale, it's kind of much more similar to the white population. In this case here, you are saying that there is some self-selection in immigration, that the Asian population is more likely to succeed later in life. So their success later in life, it's explained by self-selection in immigration. Usually the ones more better off are the ones coming here from Asia. But then when you get into account just children with mothers born in the US, and so the children are Asians, their mothers are Asians, but everybody born in the US, so third plus generation, then their chances of going up in the scale is really similar to the white population. But it's still the gap with the Hispanic population persists and with the Black population persists. And in this case here, taking out immigrants, these are only third plus because these are children born in the US with mothers born in the US, okay? And these maps here kind of show these results by different areas in the US, and that's a really interesting result. That's the geography of upward mobility. It shows average individual income for males with parents earning $25,000 per year. So these are males, the average earnings of males right now when they are adults, and when they were children, their parents used to make only $25,000 per year. So their parents were in the 25th percentile. So it's pretty much showing that those people, those males, those male adults now who have higher earnings and are concentrated in this more in these areas more in the middle of the country, they are the ones who grow up poor but have better outcomes later in life. And the ones that grow up poor and continue to be poor, they are more concentrated in Southeast US. So these ones here, they grew up poor as everybody else, but they continue to be poor later in life. And these ones here are the ones who also grew up poor, but improve their lives later when they became adults. So the green areas here show more upward mobility, and red, less upward mobility, because they were poor and continue to be poor. But when you break that by race, it's crazy. You see here the same thing, the same data. But now, still getting the people who grow up poor, but breaking this map for white men and black men. And you see, all these people here grow up poor, grow up in households in which their parents earn up to $25,000 per year. They were in the 25th percentile. They were better only than 25% of the population when they were children in terms of income. Nowadays, how are black men doing that grow up poor? Most of them continue to be poor, all these red areas. Some of them in the more beige areas, they actually have similar levels than their parents. They did not go up in the scale, they just continue the same level. And just a few of them in those areas here in green have some upward mobility. Sorry? That you don't have sufficient data. It's because the data is not sufficient enough to do this statistical analysis. Like the percentage of the black men in those areas is too small. The sample size is really small, and the statistical analysis is not significant. And so it's removed there to don't give a biased result. Among white, what happens? Even those that grow up poor, a bunch of them are doing better. Everybody here who has some shade of green are doing better than their parents. The more yellowish are doing similar as their parents. And really few of them are doing worse than their parents when they grew up. So when you do the analysis by looking at this map, it just looks like a regional issue, right? All these areas in the middle of the US doing good and Southeast doing bad. But when you break that by race ethnicity, then you see a really different picture. Blacks doing bad in all these different areas, whites doing better. Yes, so there is still some regional effects as well within white men. The ones here are doing better than their parents, and the ones here are doing worse than their parents, right? So the same scale as before, the green more upward mobility, red less, and gray insufficient data. Cool. So this is just to show that the issue of intergenerational income mobility, it's really related to these chances, to this inequality of opportunities that people had throughout their lives and that impact their chances later in life. But this full chapter, what I try to emphasize is that the African-American population, they face all these different challenges in terms of lower intermarriage rates, a higher fertility, higher levels of mortality. You have the racial crossover just really later in their lives, higher chances of being residentially segregated, and so on. And that paper by Massey about the hypersegregation goes into that as well. Okay? All clear? And these are the different papers that I use for this presentation. So the next chapter is about family and sexuality. And here. So we're subdivided it in this subtopic, the family, sexuality, and here the family talking about giving you a brief historical review and talking about some more recent patterns of marriage and family today. And sexuality, trying to show you some more recent studies that try to measure the complexity of sexuality using 3 dimensions to measure it, and using data, longitudinal data from the National Survey of Family Growth that collects more detailed information about sexuality. And then I will give you some examples about that if we have time, and also family partnering. That's another way to analyze changes that are going on in terms of family composition in the US. So why do we study family in demography? The family is one of the most important foundations and agents of socialization. The family is the first place we learn culture, norms, values, and gender roles. And it's usually where fertility happens, the production of children, or most of them. So family, it's a really important place in which we see association with fertility, and exactly because we have norms and values, what you eat, your practice throughout your life, and also the genetics that affects mortality and diet and health habits affects morbidity and mortality. And also migration. We know that specific people, they move from one place to the other without their relatives, people from their household. But nowadays we see migration, both internal and international migration, of the whole household. So it's important to understand this foundation of family and how it has been changing in terms of composition through time. So family constitution varies across cultures and over time. The Western world traditionally regarded the family as constituted of a husband, wife, and children. But now we see increasing number of one-parent families, gay and lesbian families, blended families, and childless families. And in the US, we have more bilineal descendant system in which both the families of the mother and the father are important. But in some countries, the process in which you keep your wealth or you keep your characteristics and keep your links, it could be more related to the father, such as in China, and with a more patrilineal descent system. So polygyny was banned around the 12th century, and extended families declined in number. Up to around the 17th century, marriages were usually used mainly to gain an ancestral legitimacy, establish military, political, commercial, and economic alliances. So up to the 17th century, this love match approach of finding someone that you love and getting married, it was not the norm. The norm was more related to establishing these alliances, both military, political, commercial, and economic, right? And that started to change after the 17th century. By the end of the 18th century in Western Europe, the love match became normative. And so people getting married because of getting in love with each other and so on. And at that time, husbands would provide income to the family, and wife would focus on the family life, on providing education and taking care of activities in the household. But one thing that's really emphasized in the textbook is that by that time in the US, during the colonial era, there were no sharply divided roles of the husband and the wife. Everybody used to work on the same activities in the household. Husband, wife, and children all worked together. There were no divisions by gender in terms of activities being provided by the husband and those by the wife. So this style of family that after a while we started seeing in the US and then now back into a more divided role, more equal roles, we saw in the US in the past, but not as much in Western Europe. So it was more equal in the past, and then it became more divided, and then tending to be more equal division of labor and activities in the US and Western Europe and all these other more Western countries in the world, or influenced by the Western culture. Society and structural changes in Europe and the US, they influenced the now families being more nuclear. So nowadays families are not, they don't have this more extended characteristic of having a lot of like different relatives of different generations living together. It's more the parents and the children living together. And this process in which you move from extended families into nuclear families, it's related to all these structural changes that we saw developing in Europe and the US. So industrialization, urbanization, productivity, market economy, individualization, all made it, so industrialization and all these improvements in health services and so on, we saw that had a huge impact on decline of mortality. Urbanization, we start to have fewer children, and also because mortality declines, then fertility starts to decline as well. And we start to have smaller families. So we go from extended families to nuclear families. And because of rural-urban migration, more adults start to work in factories and other non-familial settings, and that influences also the fact that you have fewer members in the household and fewer children. So fertility decline we saw after the huge declines in mortality, but then as society started to develop even more, that those changes here influenced how our families are organized. The control and decision-making moved from extended families to nuclear families. Decision-making became less based on familial connections. So whether I'm gonna work somewhere or my children are going to move to get a better education, it's less related, of course you still have it, but it's less related to familial connections or to these familial networks. And it's done more in the professional level. And it's also related to this society in which you have a more market economy, individualization, and concentration of fewer people in that specific family. This is an interesting graph that Steve Ruggles, he organized based on data from 1800 to 2010. Steve Ruggles, he's a professor at the University of Minnesota, and he's the coordinator of this data portal called IPUMS, Integrated Public Use Microdata Series, IPUMS, IPUMS. And IPUMS.org, which actually I already mentioned to you here throughout this semester, it's based within the Minnesota Population Center, which is a center within the University of Minnesota. I mean, he was, so he coordinates this project, and one of the areas that he studies is exactly about how families were organized in the US historically. In this case here, you're showing how families were, mostly of them, what the highest percentage of how families were organized back from 1800. And this is data for US couples from 18 to 64 years of age. So back in the 1800s, it was much more common to find those families that had this, what's called a corporate family. It's pretty much families living in more rural areas, doing family agricultural activities. So the family more producing in this rural land for their own subsistence, but also integrating with other families, but all based on agricultural activities. And then by mid-1800s, you start to see an increase on families in which the husband works outside of the outside of the household, and the woman takes care of the activities in the household. And by the mid-1900s, you start to see an increase in households in which both the husband and the wife, they work outside of the household, and they have earnings to sustain their family. And by that time too, you start to see an increase in the percentage of households in which only the woman works outside of the household. What's important to show you here, it's related to that previous slide that I showed, in which it kind of makes a little bit of a difference between Western Europe and the US. The US, in the first half of the 1800s, what you see, it's this high percentage of corporate families, people doing more agricultural, rural activities. And in those families here, I just said in that previous slide, husbands, wives, and children, everybody worked together in the activities that family was based on those agricultural activities. As the society starts to industrialize more, people move to urban areas, and then you have these changes in social norms as well. then you start to see an increase in the percentage of families in which only the husband works outside of the household. And then what we see in more recent times is these huge increases in households that have more both husband and wife working outside. What's interesting from this, I follow Steve Rogers on Twitter, and he gave an interview to that website called The Atlantic, and he explained that to The Atlantic. And he said that he gave a lot of different feedback, like follow-up questions and so on, but still, The Atlantic focus, the analysis saying, oh, we have to change how our families are organized because the current situation is not working. But that's not what Steve Rogers told them. He said, actually, this is working more now because you have higher proportion of the households in which both parents are working and bringing money to outside. And this way here, in which only we had the male breadwinner, that was not good because it created all this gender inequality in the country. So in more recent years, you start to see more gender equality and more similar opportunities for men and women in the labor market. Still, men and women with similar levels of education, similar levels of training, similar levels of occupation, still women making on average 30% less than men in the labor market. Still, you have all this gender gap in income in the US, but that improved a lot comparing to previous decades, right? So following these demographers that I already mentioned, Philip Cohen as well, it's good to have some of this debate that they have with the media and among demographers themselves. So in the US has been experiencing some significant demographic changes in these last years. We have been seeing changes in life expectancy at birth, age when women have the last child, and also marriage and childbearing no longer are defining events on the lives of people in the US. So just going in each one of those here, life expectancy at birth. The life expectancy at birth in the US increased from 74 years in the 19th century to around 83 years of age, based on data from 2012. So we have all this improvement in life expectancy at birth, saying pretty much that you have a decline in mortality. And that's really related to the improvements that we saw in the mortality chapter. In relation to the second topic, age when women have the last child. The age when a woman would have her last child does not greatly impact her anymore like it did in the 19th century. For example, in the 19th century, women had 14 years of life remaining after they raised their last child to age 15. So women used to have more kids throughout their reproductive life, and they used to have kids until older ages. And then, on average, when these women had their children and the children completed 15 years of age, they would have on average only 14 years of life remaining. And you learn that this kind of analysis can be done using life tables, right? Because then you can see what's the usually age into which women in the 19th century, how old were they on average when their children completed 15 years? And then you see in the life table how many years of life remaining they had up after that. And it was only 14 years of life remaining. Today, women have 33 years of life remaining by the time they have raised their last child to age 15. So more than double. And also, nowadays, with more equal gender roles in the household, in which both men and women take care of their kids, that pressure is lower among women, not only because of this 33 years of life remaining compared to 14, but also because still different roles in our society, gender roles, but still we have been seeing improvements in these last decades. And the third point, marriage and childbearing are no longer defining events and activities of our lives. In earlier times, they were our identity. When we marry, whether we have children, when we have children, who we marry, those are defining events, important events in our life, and they are less of a central part of our life. Nowadays, we focus more on investing in our education, finishing at least a college education, and then getting a good job. And after being more stable, then formally getting married, right? So the priority switches into first investing on your life, on your education, and on your job stability, and then getting married and forming a family. And here in this part of the lecture, I will show some changes in marriage and fertility trends over time, and I will focus on the US. And pretty much focusing on these 5 topics here, which relate a little bit to the first lectures that we had at the beginning of this course, when we were talking about demographic changes that are going on in the US. But here, we are focusing on changes related to marriage and family. How old are people today when they marry for the first time? How many people get married? How many people cohabit before marriage? How many babies are born to unmarried women? And what are the trends of interracial marriage? And these trends of interracial marriage, that's the one that I got some graphs, some data from surveys done by the Pew Research Center, right? So let's just go. We will not have time to go through all of those today, but we'll start now. So age at first marriage. Males, usually they were 26 years of age, and females 22 years of age by the end of the 19th century when they first got married. By the year 1960, actually, people start to get married at younger ages. Males at 22.8 years on average, and women dropped from 22 to 20.3. And this process in which people start to get married earlier in the 60s, it's related to the growth of all well-paid jobs under industrialization. So I just mentioned before, usually people tend in more recent years to invest in education and jobs before getting married. And by the 60s, exactly because of economic growth and good jobs related to industrialization in the country, both males and females start to getting married earlier compared to the 19th century, the end of the 19th century. But after 1960, we have been seeing an increase in age at first marriage. Males increased from 22.8 in 1960 to 29 in 2014, and women from 20.3 to 27 in 2014. And that's the graph here. So this graph is pretty much showing that from 1890 to around 1960s, the median age at first marriage actually declined, because at this time here, more industrialization, more job opportunities, people more stable, they get married. And then in more recent years, you start to see a postponement of marriage. So people start to invest more in education, try to invest more in getting good jobs before getting married. That's one thing that trends over time. that has a U shape here. Another thing from this graph, men on average getting married older than women. Right? Exactly because of the pattern of men on average being older than the woman that they married to. There's a second information from this graph. Third, the differentials in median age at marriage by sex decline over time. It was much higher in 1890 and 1900 compared to more recent years. You start to see, okay, it's increasing over time since the 1960s, but the differential is a little smaller. Exactly because now you start to see both men and women delaying the age in which they get married because of investments in education, jobs, and everything, but the gap persists, but it's not so wide as it was in the past. Cool. I will continue on this topic about family and sexuality on Thursday. The quiz 18 is now open. It's going to be open until tomorrow at noon. The extra credit activity 4 related to critical thinking, it's going to be open until Thursday at noon. And then on Thursday, I will post the extra credit 5, which is going to be related to social responsibility. And of course, related to the topic of this course. The quiz is short answer, right? The quiz today is multiple choice. The quizzes are the same style, 2 multiple choice questions. And the quiz today is about the race ethnicity chapter. Thank you very much. Have a great day, and I see you guys on Thursday.